Hey, what's going on, guys? World War III is upon us, so I'm gonna cope with my inability to do anything about it by talking about video games. God, why did I give up drinking for Lent? And I'm gonna cut right to the chase here. Static is one of my favorite superheroes, and it's a damn shame that he was never given the proper video game treatment. So here's a video where I pitch to you Static Shock the video game. Now, before we go any further, I have to address the 17-year-old elephant in the room.
That's what I'm talking about.
Now, I've said this before in past videos, but the first Infamous game is basically just the Friends remake of the original Milestone Static comics. There's an explosion, and one of the guys who was at Ground Zeroes gets electricity powers, and he lives in this once great metropolis that's completely gone to hell and is now controlled by superpowered gangs. It's literally Static. So you're already going to be facing that uphill battle when designing a video game based on Static. But I also feel like that presents an interesting challenge and potentially forces developers to really hone in and focus on what makes Static unique both in the comics and the early 2000s cartoon, which I guess in this case is me. I'm developers. So, in the same way that Spider-Man games are universally designed around his web swinging and acrobatics, I'd take a similar approach to Virgil's iconic hover disc, the Static Saucer, and I would really lean into Static being a superpowered skater, kind of like the Milestone Returns era Static comics. So, a lot of the game's core mechanics would be built around that design philosophy instead of Infamous, which, at its core, is a third-person shooter. Because in my mind, the ideal Static game is a cross between Team Reptile's Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, EA Black Box and EA Vancouver's Skate 2, and the long lost but not forgotten Star Wars The Force Unleashed. So picture this: Dakota City, a cel-shaded metropolis that looks like a hyper-stylized version of Detroit with one foot in the future and one foot stuck in the past. But the city is under heavy surveillance between the local cops and a private security force owned by local tech billionaire Edwin Alva of Alva Industries. The city's been on lockdown after a Black Lives Matter protest in the Paris Island district took a turn for the worse. The police fired an experimental tear gas into the crowd that would mark protesters and rioters alike with a radioactive isotope so that they'd be trackable for later arrest. However, the tear gas used was quantum vapor, a substance created by Alva Industries that, when fired into the crowd, not only spread like wildfire across the ghettos of Paris Island, it also poisoned anybody exposed, resulting in horrific deaths and, in some cases, radical genetic mutations. So in the wake of the disaster, Alva Industries has made a deal with local officials to hunt down and contain anyone who is mutated, with mutated metahumans in this case being locally referred to as Bang Babies, with the Paris Island tragedy being nicknamed the Big Bang, because there was Dakota City before the Big Bang, and the city afterwards kind of just feels like a whole new universe. Now, when the game opens up, you meet a high school girl named Frida Gorin who walks into an arcade to meet up with a guy named Hotstreak. But he's not there. Instead, she's greeted by his posse who wants to take her to a secondary location to actually meet up with him, which she's just not into. So the gangsters get a little rough with her, and just before things escalate further, Static shows up, and this is where we get the game's combat tutorial. Now, like I said, combat would be heavily inspired by The Force Unleashed, so you tap square for a light melee attack, and you hold square to perform heavy melee attacks, like Static's Taser Punch, for example. And if you hold triangle, you basically unleash Sith Lightning like Starkiller from the Force Unleashed games. You can also bob and weave by pressing circle, and double tapping allows you to speed dash out of the way of enemy attacks. Which, once fully upgraded, you can make electrical holograms of yourself, which will confuse enemies, and once they attack them, they'll be electrocuted. And like in any game, you can upgrade your base abilities with a skill tree as you progress throughout the game. And because Virgil can control and manipulate the electromagnetic spectrum, he's not just limited to electrokinesis. He can do a lot more than just shoot lightning. He can also generate electromagnetic fields and telekinetically interact with metal objects and electrical appliances. So by holding L2, you can interact with and weaponize metal objects in your environment by generating force fields around them. But he can also generate force fields around himself to block enemy attacks that can't be dodged, like minigun fire, lasers, and speedster attacks. And you can toggle between generating a personal force field and an external force field by pressing L1. But again, this is the kind of thing that you would unlock later in the game. Now, after the combat tutorial, you've rescued Frida, but you've also completely trashed the arcade, so the cops are on their way, as are these specialized Alva units to arrest and contain you because Static is a bang baby. So this is where you get the traversal tutorial, and you really get to explore Dakota City here, which, as I said, is very influenced by New Amsterdam from Bomb Rush Cyberpunk. The city is a glorified skate park, and you can summon your Static Saucer by pressing R2. From there, you push yourself in whatever direction you want to go in with the L3 bumper, which is pretty standard movement for gaming. Now, the R3 bumper, while you can use it to move the camera during combat situations or if you just want to, walk around, but when you're riding your hover disc, R3 is your trick button, a lot like how it is in the EA Skate games. And this is where the game would deviate from the comics and TV shows just a little bit, because typically, Static can just fly on his Static Saucer, but here, I thought it'd be a lot more dynamic and fun gameplay-wise to treat Traversal like a high-mobility platformer akin to Cyberpunk or Jet Set Radio or Sunset Overdrive. So you navigate through the city on your saucer, and you grind on railings and building ledges and electrical wires. You can also grind vertically on poles like in Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, and when you perform tricks, you produce an AoE that not only boosts your momentum, but also causes damage to nearby enemies if you're being chased, or if you're choosing to go about a combat situation while riding the Static Saucer. And during the tribal tutorial, Static's on the phone with Frida, who's calling you as Virgil to tell you that she's just been rescued by Static. It's very much an updated version of the phone call between Virgil and Frida from the first issue of the 90s Static comic, except we now live in the 21st century and people use cell phones instead of landlines. And I guess this is the best place to talk about the story. This game would very much be inspired by the 90s Milestone Static comics, while pulling a lot of visual and design cues from the iconic early 2000s TV show, but primarily the comics. Particularly the first 4 issues of the 90s Milestone comics, and Static Season 1 from Milestone Returns. So you can expect to see both of Virgil's parents alive and well, and his friend Larry wouldn't be reduced to a cameo like he was in the show. And when you open the game, you're wearing that original 90s Static costume, and the first major boss of the game is Hotstreak, a small-time gangster who's trying to make a name for himself, and he feels the best way that he can do that is by killing Static. And because one of Hotstreak's thugs noticed how Static was spitting game at Frida after the combat tutorial, word's gotten back to Hotstreak that the best way to get to Static is through Frida. So his gang kidnaps her in the middle of class, and Virgil has to go save Frida as Static, but it's one of those unwinnable boss fights, because much like the comics and the TV show, when Virgil meets Hotstreak, he finds out that it's his school bully, Francis Stone, and he just freezes and gets his ass handed to him. And this is when Frida finds out that Virgil is Static. I'd also have Richie find out around the same time, because I know a lot of people's main exposure to the Static mythology comes from the TV show, which swaps Frida with Richie as Virgil's best friend and confidant. So here, I just have them both be in the know. I'd also keep Richie as a theater kid as opposed to being a tech whiz. So the in-universe explanation for all of your alternate costumes is that they all come from Richie. So the iconic TV show costume that you get later in the game is your new default costume, the Milestone Returns Hardware Junior costume, the New 52 costume, which I guess is also technically a Hardware Junior costume, the future costume worn by adult Static in the TV show, among a few others. All of that comes from Richie, and that's how he'd get the nickname Gear, to honor the TV show version of the character. And while I'd be using the Black Lives Matter protest setting for the Big Bang, I'd keep the angle where Virgil took a gun to the protest. Not because he was actually going to protest, but instead he was given a gun by Frida's boyfriend Larry so that he could go kill Francis, who also just happened to be on Paris Island during the protest. And the whole game would center around that concept of masculinity and validation, and the question of what's more important, internal or external validation. And you'd see those ideas represented in the various gangsters and supervillains in the game, like Hotstreak, but also Ebon, Kangor, Rubber Band Man, Talon, Shiv, Commando X, as well as victims of the Big Bang, and how Virgil goes about dealing with them, like Destruct and Permafrost, who don't get fun, cool powers. They're just regular people who got caught up in a bad situation, and becoming Bang Babies made their lives infinitely worse. As well as other citizens of Dakota City who need it, really furthering Virgil's character arc in realizing that being a superhero is more than just being celebrated by crowds of people for beating up bad guys. Sometimes it's making sacrifices and doing the right thing even when it hurts. I'd also pull from a pretty new idea from the comics, and if it's not new, it's new to me, where the Big Bang was intentional. This game would take place in an established DC universe, and in a world where the Justice League is running around, and the United Nations has their own sanctioned metahuman response team with Stormwatch, Edwin Alva wants to have a privatized superhuman army of his own. And the game would escalate from this low-stakes story about getting into street fights with superpowered gangsters to Static fighting this megalithic corporate force of nature in Alva Industries. And I just feel like a Static game is possible. And I feel like there's a lot of demand for one with this character, and this is just the best way that I think you can go about it while avoiding too many comparisons to Infamous. But while also paying respect to the comics and the TV show, and really getting to the heart of who this character is and why he works so well. And if I may, I know this is the ultimate shot in the dark, but a few years back I made a video similar to this, which barely got any views, where I pitched a Hellboy game, and like 4 years later, we got Web of Word, and that game is basically what I pitched in that video. So I know that somebody out there is watching these. So hopefully DC gets off their ass and makes a Static game in the near future. Maybe they'll get to it one day. Who knows? Maybe they will when they realize they have other characters at their disposal than just Batman. Anyway, thanks for watching. And does this sound like the type of game that you'd like to play? Let me know down below in the comment section. And in the meantime, I am the Mystical Green Beanie. Thanks for watching. And as always, until next time, peace.
Charged up.